the question is like, how do we actually get to this? How do we get from language 1 and 2 to sort of a common language, right? And ultimately for us, that solution was Radix UI.
I made a false assumption, which was that and actually just by not doing all this stuff, you can actually go faster. What you're saying is that no, it just doesn't make,
you can't.
It doesn't make sense for you to spend all your time building these buttons.
The point is, if you're running a startup, like you choose this, you align it with engineering, and then you just get going.
We're good to go. Like we built navbar in 5 to 10 minutes max, and it looks exactly the same as in Figma.
You get to not have to toil with the finicky, like how does a button look like? What's the corner radius? You can actually focus on how are we going to build features that really will align and solve their problems on a day-to-day basis.
So why are we here today? I think we had three things we're going to go through. One, the new design system and why we're taking it on right now. Second thing, basically our implementation going through Figma and showing how we've really adapted the Radix UI component library to our design styles and everything, our buttons and everything. And then lastly, going into an example, you guys showing why it helps us build faster. Is that right?
Let's do it. We're at this point where we need to start expanding the surface area of the products that we're building at Jam. And before you want to increase that surface area, you probably want to clean house a little bit. And so this is very specific to us, but we iterated a bunch before we got to product market fit. And now we're at this point where, hey, we have product market fit and we need to scale the surface area of the product with not only new features, but maybe even expand the surface area into new product categories. And we want to do that in a way where we're not burdened down by sort of that existing sort of like design debt in a way in the Figma files, but also the design that we have in the front end code base. And so we need to clean house. So clean up your room before you try to like sort of clean your surface area before you try to expand that and make sure it's scalable.
The room
otherwise
metaphor.
You're scaling. Yeah, you're scaling
clean your room before you
clean your room. Jordan Peterson is here.
Before you expand your room.
Yeah, before you expand, clean your room before you expand your room. Like the Jordan Peterson of product development. And so that's what we're currently doing. And we looked at a bunch of like component libraries that we could just reuse. And generally what I'd recommend is you don't need to reinvent buttons. It's really nice to do. And I think like it's a trap a lot of like design engineers or designers fall into because that like it's really nice to work on buttons. But generally, if you have really nice buttons, doesn't mean you get revenue as a product or that you hit product market fit. And so, you know, there's a question around focus. And so someone has invented the button input fields and how these things work. And you should probably stand on those shoulders of giants in a way. There's no reason to reinvent the button, essentially, if you're going from 0 to 1 as a startup in a way. And so we looked at a bunch of component libraries. Obviously, we also did an inventory of our code base in a way. And what we did and how we think about this when we talk about a design system or a component library in a sense, is we needed to first align on like, what do we even mean by this? Like, what is a design system anyway? Is it like something that designers use and then engineering is not involved? Is it something only on the engineering side? And the way that we sort of define this is that a design system is actually just a common language between design and engineering. It's a way that we communicate as two very distinct disciplines that think about things very differently or approach things very differently, but have to produce, you know, features for our customers at the end of the day for our users. And so designers approach things by the happy path and then think of the edge case later. And like engineering discipline actually thinks about edge cases first and then works out the happy path in a way. And so that's like, there's a different thinking in a way, but there's a way to align this thinking, but also the language. And so if you think about it.
And Martin, just one thing on that before you keep going. Just like one repercussion of that too, right, is if you're designing all these things and there's a mismatch, like if there's not Radix and Radix, but like two different matching systems, then you get all these like little inconsistencies that then create this complexity and this debt that people need to fix later. And it says, oh, things are looking great in Figma, but our product isn't looking so hot, right? And that's what matters.
Right. And so like maybe let me go into that. why do you want a common language in the first place, right? Is exactly what you just mentioned, Ian, which is if your Figma file looks great, but then your engineers are not able to translate what you have in design into the product for the end consumer, the user or the customer, like, like you have these weird inconsistencies that build over time, and then you end up having a bunch of design debt, right? And then people are like, well, how do we get to the bottom of this issue? Because the design team is like, Figma file looks great, and the engineering team is like, well, but like we can't implement it in a certain way. And so what ends up happening in a lot of teams is like designers just make these decisions to take like a component library off the shelf, like, I don't know, Material UI. But then on the implementation side, an engineering team might go for, I don't know, like Shad CN or Radix. And so you have sort of like fundamentally a misalignment in the languages that you speak, right? Because each component library also has their own logic in a way. Because it's not just how it looks, it's also how these components behave. And then how you stack those components together create the overall look and feel. The behavior stacked together creates the overall look and feel of the product, right? And so you want to speak the same language, and you want to make that decision together, right? As a design team, but also as an engineering team, as a product team. And so if you think about this like from first principles, on the design side, we make a stack choice in terms of like what design tool we should be using, right? Figma, Sketch, XD, or Framer. In our case, we use Figma. And engineers do also a framework choice, which is like React, Angular, or Vue. In our case, we use React and Figma. And then what you would want to do as a team is like, select the base language. Like, don't reinvent a button from scratch. Like, just take a component library that has pre-built reusable components that are accessible, but you need to choose the same one. So in a sense, you need a starting Figma file that is equal to some sort of like repo or I guess a large NPM package that you can import on the engineering side. And then your design system is essentially that Figma file and the front end code base working in synchronicity, as in like, not that they're connected. You can connect them at some point, but that they look and feel the same, that a button that a designer pulls out of a Figma file looks and has the same component properties as if an engineer imports a button in their text editor. And that's what we mean by common language. And language also evolves, right? That's like kind of like this metaphor where like if you change, like you add new vocabulary, you add new components to your design system, and that then needs to be sort of synced over to engineering. And what that allows you to do as a discipline is not only like ship better experiences to customers or users, but it allows you to also speed up like the design process, because we can very quickly take a button, take these sort of like common components and mock up a flow or a prototype and go test that with users. And we don't need to rely on an engineering function or an engineering discipline to like, build something that feels real. So we can produce prototypes really fast, de-risk engineering. And then of course the actual front end is the stuff that is the real user interface that will be used by our users.
So when I hear about all this, it sounds very nice. But the initial thought that comes to my head is like, all right, you're a startup. You're trying to ship like right away. Like when, like maybe you're trying to move fast. Maybe it doesn't make sense to get all these, like everything super aligned and looking all good. Like what is the variety, like your opinion and the more common attitude about when is the right time in the startup's life to really spend a lot of time on the design system? Or is it something from day one that you're like, this should be like figured out? Like what is the timeline?
I think like if you're 0 to 1, you should spend least amount of focus on like building your own custom design system and language. What you should do is kind of like we're also highlighting here. I do think it makes a lot of sense. Make a decision on a common component library. These are already pre-built components. Theme it in some way that you think is sort of appropriate for your brand or product, but you don't have to. So you then skip a step. But theming takes like a day max. Yeah. And then you start shipping features. And so you don't actually sink a lot of time into like the alignment itself. You start from scratch, built on the shoulders of giants in the sense of like just importing like an entire like component library where you can just use and buttons, input fields, whatever you have, and start shipping features to users. So I actually think like while this sounds complicated, it's actually like a decision, quick implementation, and then you can start shipping features, versus the alternative reality would be like you build a design system from scratch. So you have to toil for like 6 or 8 weeks to figure out how your buttons look.
Yeah. So
does that make sense?
I made a false assumption, which was that actually just by not doing all this stuff, you can actually go faster. What you're saying is that no, it just doesn't make
you can't.
It doesn't make sense for you to spend all your time building these buttons and like doing all this custom stuff because you're trying to go super fast. But actually, no, the easiest thing is just to take what's there and to just run with it right away and just not spend any time customizing, at least. Yeah.
100%. And there's a bunch of like work that's sort of baked in. Accessibility, like you would have to like rebuild all of this. And so it's a lot of effort to do this. Like, and it's essentially not even worth it at the end of the day. Let's take a look at like where we are. Again, we talked about like we iterated the product a ton, both in design and also in the code base. And essentially right now the problem that we're facing is like we're speaking different languages, and like it's fine. You can build a product like that, but it's not ideal, right? Like imagine us sitting in a room and like someone speaks only Spanish and the other half speaks English. Like you can probably work together with hands and feet, but like probably more effective if you sort of have a common language in a way.
It's such a funny visual. It's a hilarious visual.
And so like maybe this is also like a little bit like
this isn't
demeaning to engineering, because we have the same sort of like mess. Yeah.
The designer made this evidently.
Yeah. Maybe it should be 2 spaghetti monsters, but generally like we're not aligned. And the question is like, how do we actually get to this? How do we get from language 1 and 2 to sort of a common language, right? And ultimately for us, that solution was Radix UI. And
not sponsored, not
sponsored at all.
Not affiliated, no other vested interest.
And the reason is very specific to us and very technical, because if we use something like ShadCN or any sort of other component library, it might actually be a lot more work because the styles might interfere with each other. So the reason why we chose this is very specific to us as a startup. And I'll guide you sort of through like how that looks like, how our Figma file now looks like. And then we're going to do a little quick demo of like how we would actually use it and workflow it together with Petar. Cool. Okay, so we've got this file. This file is actually open source. We just pulled this. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. I'll give a shout out to the guy. I think the guy's name's Victor. You can pull this from Figma community. And essentially what we did is we took this file and we started theming it. And we
that's cool.
Essentially themed the library. So, you know, generally how sort of a component library is organized is you have your design tokens, so your colors, then your typography, like your typography scale, and you know, maybe even layouts. So this is your spacing tokens. People in design land would refer to them as tokens. In Figma, they're all stored in something called variables. Now, it's going to look super technical, but I promise you it isn't. And there's a theme, and each of these are essentially sort of like quote unquote design tokens. They exist for colors, as you can see. Like there's a color ramp, and then we've got some colors listed there. They also exist for typography, so defining the font family, but also the font sizes, and then for spacing as well. So what you saw visually on Canvas just now is just stored technically inside of Figma, and it's kind of named. And when we talk about a common language, these things should be the same across design and engineering, meaning like if a designer means he's using a space 2, that should give you a certain pixel amount, and that pixel amount should be the same for the engineer in a sense, right? So 1 is a 4 pixel space, 2 spacing token is a 8 pixel, and so on. And this is kind of true across color, spacing, corner radius, but also your typography system in a way. And so when you have these tokens, you then produce something called, components. And essentially here, all you're really doing is producing or taking these tokens and like artifacting them together or bostling them together, if you may, into different variations of a button in this case. We also have checkboxes. Like everything you need to build a product is in a component library. It doesn't matter which one you choose. You don't need to reinvent this stuff. You just have it. They have component properties. Every component library might have a little bit of a different implementation of this. But the point is, if you're running a startup, like you choose this, you align it with engineering, and then you just get going. And then no one has to spend hours trying to figure out how some of this stuff works, right? That's sort of what we've done. We've taken the file from Victor. We've styled it. This is an official file that's also linked on the Radix website, and then we can get into how we actually kind of use this thing in sort of everyday life. What I've essentially done is like I've taken some of the components from the Radix library here, like buttons, a search bar, and another sort of like icon button, and then we also have a text. And essentially what we can do really quickly is like, I don't even need to think of composing these things from scratch, but essentially what I can do is just like create a nav bar real quick. So I'm going to create a container, so a frame around this, and we'll call this trailing. And I'm now going to define the spacing, right? You saw those spacing tokens. I'm just going to put them at a 2, which is sort of 8 pixels. And then we also have our typography, like let's just call this title. And it's actually, let's link it to, I don't know, like a 16, but like 16 medium. And then wrap that in something called leading. And then together put that into something called like a nav bar. And then all I would do here is just, again, like choose a color token for the background. And then we're just going to work on the padding a little bit here. So essentially what we've done now or composed here is like a nav bar that has leading and trailing content. And there's auto space in between. And now we're just going to work on maybe the padding really quickly. Like I'm just going to give this a 32 and then like a padding of, I don't know, 3. Whoops, maybe not. And give this like nav bar title, right? Make this a component, and then essentially I've got my nice little nav bar. And the coolest thing about this is, yeah, maybe we could also give it a shadow or something. Shadow 2, right? The coolest thing about this is, one, we now don't need to like, create weird arguments around like how a button has to look like. And we can actually really focus on essentially like the flow of things. And so here we go. We've got our little nav bar composed with Radix components on our screen. And then what Petar would do is like just come in, and because we used all these wonderful tokens, he could see all these wonderful things, the spacing, he sees the variant of the button. So this is a color neutral. So the variant is solid, the color is set to neutral, and high contrast is set to true. And when he takes a button and modifies these props, that button should look exactly the same. Same with search, and then same with even the typography in a way. So I'm going to hand over to Petar, so switch back out of dev mode, and he can show you like how fast it is to build this.
Let's see. I have already set up Radix, and I'm gonna jump to the Figma and see what Martin did. I'm gonna press Shift D to open dev mode, and I'm gonna quickly scan through the components. If I zoom in a little bit, I should be able to see a spacing top and bottom is 1, while the side is 6. I see that we used text field, search bar button, another icon button. So maybe let's just go first and import those components. I would need flex, text field for the search bar, and button and icon button. Okay, I would just go quickly there. Create a container. We know that padding vertical is 1, while the side padding was 6, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
We had a text with, just gonna pull this text here. And we have button and icon button. Okay, let's quickly check how it's looking. It's pretty basic, but we're gonna tweak it a little bit.
I would call
What we're missing still is text field. Radix is very specific in this case, so we should go there and check the docs. Maybe we want to just copy over this, so make it quickly. Okay, text field is constructed from 2 components. Root is basically root of the search bar, which is our component, and slot is, you can imagine it as like placeholder for the icon. We will need to use our own icon set, which is untitled UI, and I'm just gonna quickly have a look what's the name of the icon. It's search small. Okay, search small. It's a self-closing tag. Let's have another look. Okay, now it looks a little bit better. Let's give it a little bit of spacing. I'm just gonna wrap this into another flex because we'll need to.
I appreciate you doing this live. This is impressive just to run through this.
What is it?
It's actually also cool for me to see.
Justify between. Okay, now we're almost there. What I'm noticing is that this icon button should be probably other variant. I could quickly go there and see, okay, it's variant soft, color is accent by default. Let's maybe switch this variant to soft. And yeah, we'll need also to use another icon there. It's dots horizontal, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's called dots horizontal.
Okay, I'm gonna pull this icons, dots horizontal, make it there. Okay, now we're talking.
The flex needs a gap of 8 pixels, so spacing 2.
Exactly,
yeah,
spacing 2. This one.
Yeah.
Yep. It's 2. And probably, yeah, text size is probably, let's check that one. Font size is 3. And what else do we miss?
Oh, the top padding, right?
I feel like padding is a little bit bigger around there. But maybe it's just, oh, I know, what is it? The text has also a padding of 8 pixel. It should be like, oh no, there is no P. We'll need to wrap the text into another container. I'm just gonna do flex and say padding 2. Okay. Oh no, that's not gonna work. You know what? We'll just increase padding on wrapper containers so it looks more like
nice.
in design. So I think this should be as close as possible. And what I'm noticing there, the button is gray. I'm just gonna go there and swap color to gray. And as we can read in the right column on the Figma. High contrast is set to true, so we'll need to pass that prop to our button. And then once we're back, we're good to go. Like, we built navbar in 5 to 10 minutes max, and it looks exactly the same as in Figma.
That was funny. When you started it, I thought it was going to be the example of the spaghetti talking to the Figma. Where you go, and it looks the same.
I think the tricky part was Martin added a bit of a padding to text by accident, or I don't know what happened. And the whole container expanded, and we were not able to repro that very quickly.
But you can kind of see, right? So the naming of the component, not only the visual style of them, but like actually how they're named in Figma is really, really important for, having a common language. Like, what is the variant called? And so like, it is kind of, it seems like a minor thing, but imagine like how many times like an engineer has to look at a design. And then if these names are not aligned, how much computation needs to happen in that person's brain that is completely unnecessary if you speak the same language, right? Kind of like when you go to your summer vacation in Italy and sort of maybe, do you speak any languages, Ian? Like, no? Like Spanish?
Molto bene.
Molto bene. Molto bene, Italian. But you have to think about it, right? And so now, because we have a common language, you don't have to think about English. You just think about the communication itself a little bit more. And that's the same thing in sort of product development. You get to not have to toil with the finicky, like how does a button look like? What's the corner radius? You can actually focus on, okay, how are we going to move users through this experience, through this flow? And how are we going to build features that really will align and solve their problems on a day-to-day basis?
Thanks for joining.
Thank you very much.
All right,
cool.
See you later.
Thanks, Ian. See ya.
Bye-bye.